Today's top story is another update on the RFK Stadium bill, which is hopefully, if you want that to actually pass, going to be attached to the defense bill that is going to make its way through Congress here at the end of the session. And that is where things get really complicated. To try to help sort it out, Sam Fortier, our friend from the Washington Post, is here. Sam, what's more fun, this or breaking down the offense last season?
Craig, I actually really enjoy this, man. I really enjoy learning about the intersection of business, politics, sports, the way that this is how things get done. You know, I'm not from DC. It feels very DC that this is happening, and I am enjoying tracking it, figuring it out, saying, hey, this is an incredibly complicated and weird thing. Am I looking at this right? And someone saying, no, absolutely not. Here's what you need to do.
I hear you on that, but it is also the fact that it is very DC and all of that actually frustrates the hell out of me, because at the end of the day, it's a football stadium. This should not be taking up the time of the federal government. There are real problems to be solved, and also some of the quotes in your story with your colleagues at the Post drove me absolutely up a wall. The idea the federal government shouldn't be tipping the scales and where the stadium is going. And I'm like, this is coming in a joint statement from 2 U.S. senators. You don't think that's the federal government tipping it here? So let's dive into it before we get too far into me losing my mind over the DC-ness of it all and the fact that this is how business gets done. Two senators from Maryland want basically, because this is going to be attached to a military defense bill, they want a military concession here. Ultimately, when the rubber meets the road, do you think that the DC side of this, well, I guess I should even ask you this, who is the DC side of this? Who would get to make that kind of decision? And do you think that is a quote unquote trade that they are willing to make?
Yeah, I think we got to zoom out even further here, which is basically that normally when this bill passes a subcommittee in the Senate, it goes to the Senate floor, but that, they're just running out of time. It's not going to get that. So it can get attached to one of two bills that right now they're focused on NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, but it also could get attached to basically the federal spending bill, a continuing resolution. So there's two angles here. And Maryland wants three things. They've communicated that to Chuck Schumer, and Maryland and the commanders met yesterday, and the jets are one of those things. The other things that they're looking for are assurances about what's going to happen to the Landover site if the commanders leave. They do not want it to end up like the RFK Stadium site, and they also want the team to put out a statement of, where are you going to go? What is your preference? So the Jets are one of those three things. But to go back to your original question, who is even DC in this case? It is a thing that I think people will debate what the federal legislators can do or can't do, right? Because it's the Air National Guard squadrons could be up to Congress. They could just do that unilaterally. So Maryland is talking to them about it. The assurances they want, those could only come from the commanders, the private landowners of 200 acres. And the statement also could really only come from the commanders because they need to declare, or Maryland wants them to declare where they're going to go. So now that I've made this even more complicated, what else can I say?
Let's go here. If this land was not federal land, because I do think that the idea, and this I think is really important to a lot of our listeners. Our listenership is a lot in DC and then also Maryland, just where our radio signal goes. Talking about details nobody cares about, but we have a lot of people that listen in Maryland, and if you're in PG County, you probably do want to know what's going to happen with that land. I think that's a relevant question. But if this land that was the bargaining chip on the other side of this was in Virginia or somewhere else where we're not talking about the DMV area, wouldn't the local legislators and the local folks have to deal with the team directly on that? How does that problem actually get solved, and why is the United States Congress involved in that?
Right. Yeah. The United States Congress involvement is unique to DC. But if you look at other stadium deals in other jurisdictions, oftentimes it's playing cities off of each other or playing counties off of each other, or like with what the Bears are doing right now, they were, using a suburb of Chicago, playing it off of the city of Chicago. So like sports team owners always have incentive to have multiple jurisdictions fighting over them, right? Because it drives up the price. It, gets you the best deal. And you see a lot of times, people would invent, San Antonio, or like, oh, we're going to relocate the Bills or whatever. But DC just happens to have 3 jurisdictions. One of them is mostly controlled by the federal government. And so that's how you get the like extra special complicated, pie that we have here.
So Sam Fortier, Washington Post, is with us. And we know that a contingent representing the Commanders and the NFL, which included Josh Harris, Roger Goodell, and others, met with New York Senator Chuck Schumer, who is the majority leader until Congress changes over in January. And he is the one who ultimately will decide if this RFK bill gets added to the defense bill, or if they were to veer and add it to the budget bill, but as you and your colleagues reported, to the defense bill as of now. And he apparently was like, you need to go work this out with the Maryland senators. Is it possible for Goodell and Harris and all them to work the refs, in this case Schumer, a singular ref, in another way? Or is the making the Maryland senators happy versus anybody else or any other constituency here the number one most important thing for Schumer, no matter what?
I think it would be very difficult for Goodell and Harris to work the refs in this case, because Schumer has said on the record, you need to work this out with Maryland. Like a source told me that during their conversation, Schumer told Goodell and Harris, you guys have to solve it being this problem with the Maryland senators. So to me, like, that's a referee telling you, like, go figure it out. And so now they have to figure it out, and they only have, probably 2-ish weeks to get that done.
So previously, this was being held up not by a senator or pair of senators from Maryland, but by a senator from Montana in Steve Daines. Were the Commanders and the contingency there, the NFL contingency, aware that this problem was looming? Or did the Daines hurdle finally get cleared? They look up and they're like, wait, what? Like, how prepared were they for this?
I don't think they were surprised by the Maryland delegation opposing it at all, because if you remember in February, like the Maryland delegation, despite being allies on home rule and a lot of other, DC issues, like they all opposed it in the House. And obviously that didn't matter because, they got a House floor vote that passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support. But like when Maryland indicates some opposition and then over the summer, you start hearing rumblings about the senators. Like I don't think this was a surprise at all. I think, honestly, Steve Daines was probably more of a surprise than Maryland.
Sam Fortier, Washington Post, with us here on the Hoffman Show, and we have reached out to Senator Chris Van Hollen and are working with his team, and we're going to try to ask him some of these questions directly on the show tomorrow. But in your reporting of this, how do the senators square their support for DC home rule, which for those not as versed in the political language, basically the idea that like, hey, we're adults here in the district, we can govern ourselves. Like, we're going to let them do their own thing. Like, we will let DC be DC like it was any other state, even if they don't have senators that are our colleagues here in Congress. How do they square this, what I would call power play, using the power they have to accomplish the thing that they want, with the idea that they allegedly support DC home rule?
Yeah, I think they see this as like what they would tell you is it's 2 distinct issues. Like for them, it's a bad deal for the American taxpayer, in the words of Maryland Governor Wes Moore, to give DC free land and then allow them to develop a football stadium on it. And I think that you can make some counter arguments that I think you were suggesting in the framing of the question. I think those are totally fair, but Maryland's view is this unfairly tips the scales in DC's favor in a regional competition to land a sports stadium.
Yeah, if Senator Van Hollen, if you and your team are listening and you're going to come on tomorrow, I can tell you the answer to the test beforehand. That is tipping the scales. It is not unfairly. You have an extra word in there. That is fairly tipping the scales, because it actually lets DC compete on the merits, which I guess leads to the final question here, Sam, which is kind of if you have to handicap it all right now, like how would you? And I'll give you a second to think here as I contextualize the question a little bit more, which is if this land is freed to DC and it is truly a competition of the commanders, the team deciding between Virginia, Maryland, and DC, how does that go down? And then if it doesn't get released, do they try again next year with a different Congress, or is it then down to a two-horse race between the Commonwealth and the state of Virginia or the state of Maryland?
You are asking like an incredibly difficult, very layered question. But
it's Sports Talk Radio, Sam. What do you think this is? You think it's a dog and pony show? No, this ain't Congress. Sports Talk Radio. We have serious stuff over here.
I mean, look, man, the thing that I can say is that it's Congress, so it's really hard to handicap whether this thing is going to pass or not. It's really like if it doesn't pass, like that's a huge deal. That could set you back if you're still Josh Harris wouldn't commit to trying for DC again if this fails, right? And if it fails, the only jurisdiction that has a site and the ability to offer public funding is Maryland. Like Virginia's not even at the table right now. If DC passes, this is going to be a Maryland versus DC competition. Virginia is not in play. If it doesn't pass, it's back to square one, and Josh Harris has to decide, like, do I want to do a quicker deal with Maryland, or do I want to like jump through all these political hoops to potentially get DC or Virginia at the table?
All right. Well, it sounds like you'll have some more work to do either way. And by the way, you're going to have to actually pay attention to the football team because they're good too. I don't know if you heard that, Sam.
Yeah, this is the major difference between the stadium story that popped last December being the monumental story. So now it's like, okay, I really got to lock in on the football team. Yeah,
well, I'd say for you then, with a very short timeline here for Congress and the team on the bye week came at a good time for Sam Fortier, or for a terrible time because you could have taken the week off and now you can't. Well, I'll let you sort that out amongst yourself. And hopefully to not go too deep into it, but to reference our text chain, hopefully I'll see you at a fitness class soon.
Yes, I would love that. Thanks,
All right.
Craig.
See you, buddy. That's Sam Fortier with us here on The Hoffman Show.